Welcome, y'all. If you can hear me already, you're connected to audio, go ahead and put your name and maybe where you're organizationally, who you're organizationally with as well in the chat. Any additional information too you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. See a lot of YMCA in the chat, which is great. A lot of great programming happening across the country and YMCAs, appreciate that. And seeing some of us still connecting, thank you for your patience. Welcome, welcome, Mary and Nicholas, Erica, Director of Aftercare, great. All right, y'all. Well, for sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I see we've still got a few more connecting, but that's okay. As a little bit of a frame before I totally start us, I will be asking for some audience participation throughout this. So I'm going to be asking throughout to hear some of your reflections as we're going through the session. So just as a heads up, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have your camera on or anything like that, but just, you know, if you're having some reflections as we go, please feel free to stop at any point, and I will have some explicit times for reflection as well that I'd like to hear from you all on and learn from each other, because I think that's the most important way to learn. So I'll go ahead and get us started with a quick introduction. My name is Hannah Jarman. My pronouns are she, her. I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and with an organization called Tulsa Changemakers, which is the youth arm of Leadership Tulsa. Our program focuses on, we impact students, and 400 plus students each year across 40 different Title I schools in Tulsa Public Schools and Union Public Schools in our flagship program, which is called Listen, Listen, Act. I'll go into in a little bit. But we also have 6 other programs that are specific to how do we center youth voice, choice, and power in everything we do in this city. So we're trying to build out the infrastructure and the systems to ensure that youth are at the center of a lot of what we do. And a lot of that is, you know, built within authentic youth adult partnership. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm going to share my screen. Please continue to put your introductions into the chat. Really excited to get to know you all a little bit more as we go through this session. You are here today because you signed up for a session that is called Asset-Based Community Development and Authentic Youth Adult Partnership. These two things go hand in hand for our organization, Tulsa Changemakers, and these are two kind of foundational mindsets that we want to use as we are continuing to have conversations with youth throughout, throughout our city. So we're going to be talking about 2 different concepts today that are, again, intertwined: asset-based community development and authentic youth adult partnership. Really quick, again, quick introduction to who Tulsa Changemakers is, and a program manager with this organization, and kind of the mindset that I'm bringing to the space is that Tulsa Changemakers builds capacity, this is our mission statement, in youth, adults, and systems to support youth in driving positive impact in Tulsa right now and into the future. So we see our work not only as centering youth voice, choice, and power, but also figuring out how can we build capacity with adults and systems to ensure that youth are supported in everything that they do and all the power that they lean into. So it goes broader than just thinking about youth in a silo. This is how youth and adults can really interact and build that power together. So hopefully that's something you can bring out of this session. And I want to make it hyper relevant to your own context as well. A lot of this work we're going to see can be done no matter, size of your community and where you're working as well. So I've got 3 session goals that I want to make kind of explicit before we get started. I used to teach. I taught for 5 years in both the elementary and middle school settings. So I'm big on audience participation through helping me read through the slides. Would anybody like to read my first session goal for us today? Go ahead and unmute. I know someone's ready to read. I can feel it. Beautiful. Thank you, Nico. Appreciate that. How about number 2? Who can unmute and read number 2 for me?
Identify community assets to bring into summer programming.
We're going to be talking about summer programming and how are we looping in the entire community into that. How about number 3? I know someone's ready.
I'll take number 3 as well.
Thanks.
Identify and leverage youth as asset in summer programming.
Beautiful. So identify and leverage youth, right? Youth are assets in our programming. If we are not looping them into every decision that we make, we are not creating programming that is built for them. So we're going to talk about how to do that. What are the how steps? But first, we're going to kind of ground ourselves in a little bit of storytelling and how this has been done in different communities really successfully. So before we dive in, I want to kind of source some prior knowledge here. I'm going to ask them that you can either put this answer into the chat or you can go ahead and unmute as well. Both options work for me. What does it mean to be asset-based? I'm going to leave that question for us. I'm going to give us, 10 seconds to think independently, but then I want you to either put in the chat or go ahead and unmute. To you, what does it mean to be asset-based? Looking for answers either in the chat or full group. I see Beth, to build on the assets a community already has. Awesome. To focus on what is working. Yeah, for sure. I think asset-based to me means to be focused on resources available to achieve success. Ooh. To appreciate the strengths of the youths in our program. Beautiful. That's great. So saw a lot of great answers in the chat. You all, are correct, right? Assets are leaning into the strengths that a community already has instead of taking everything at a deficit lens. Okay, I think often in community development, we see that we have to focus on the challenges, right? Like what challenges are we trying to solve? How do we transport students from one A to B? We're looking at transportation as an issue, as an example. Instead of looking at the assets, we have families who are willing to carpool. How do we ensure that we're using those strengths, those assets, those skills or passions, and building that bridge between what are the challenges and what are the strengths that we have already? This is not to say that asset-based community development is putting on rose-colored glasses and saying, everything's great. We all have these strengths. There's no problems to be solved in the community. That is not what this is. This is just a framework in order to kind of take both both the challenges you see in a community and the assets, and how do we use those assets to really set the foundation for solutions to those challenges. So asset-based community development, exactly what you all said in the chat. Appreciate that. Appreciate you moving here with me. So asset-based community development is where we're going to start. We're actually going to start with a little story about a community called Woodlawn. Woodlawn is on the south side of Chicago. Woodlawn, a couple of years back, created a map. This is what their map looked like. This map included all of the problems or challenges that they saw in this community on the south side. They saw broken families. They saw that there was crime. They saw child abuse, unemployment, truancy, illiteracy, dropouts. So this is where their mindset was. They were like, these are all the problems. I'm sitting in this space of only looking at the challenges that I see in my Woodlawn community. A group of people came together and they decided, I'm looking at all these challenges, but I also love my community. I love my community. What are the reasons that I love my community? So they went to youth. Okay, they looked at youth and they said, you know what, you all have a ton of knowledge. You all are the future of this community here on the south side of Chicago. So we want to ask you, if you could learn anything new, if you wanted to shift some of these challenges we see, like truancy, for example, right? If you want to shift kind of some of these, just kind of like dropping out, right? Illiteracy as an example at the school level, how can we do that? And they said, well, why don't we just ask youth what they want and need? So the Woodlawn community ended up going to the high school, the Woodlawn High School, and they asked students, they said, what skills or what things do you have interest in learning? So, we've got things on here, cooking, banking, we see as the top two. I know when I asked my fourth graders and my middle schoolers when I taught, they would always say, I want to learn how to pay taxes. So I pull up TurboTax and I'd be like, you got to type in the note, Anyway, so, students are interested, right? They want to learn those real world skills. They said computer technology, they went down to skating. They had lifestyles for youth, grammar, first aid. They talk about all these different things that they weren't actually getting in their classes, right? This is not actually the content they were getting, but this is the things that they wanted to learn, right? These are the essential other items that they felt were really important. Marketing, basic accounting, right? Having faith, journalism, reading comprehension was, on top of their list too. So they surveyed students within a group, right? And said, what kind of things do we want to see? What skills, what are things that would keep you coming to school, keep you engaged, keep you excited? So I said, great, we have this long list of all these different skills, all these different things. Okay, how are we going to teach students this? Like, what are we going to do here? And so this group came together and they said, wait a second, we have these strengths in our community. So they brought together 17 Woodlawn residents, adults in the community. And they asked the adults, what are your gifts? So the adults came and they said, I'm solutions driven. I'm a motivator. I get things done. I have a vision. I'm organized. I'm good at business, education. I'm good with my hands. I can cook. They continued asking. They said, I'm good with kids. I can do voiceovers on the radio, right? I've got public speaking skills. I'm an intense motivator. I'm good with people. I encourage people. I can do math, right? These are 17 people. These are the gifts that they had. They then asked, what specific skills do you have? Let's ask these 17 adults that are part of this community, what kind of skills do you have? Computer troubleshooting. We can do strategic planning. We had housekeeping, cooking, medical assistant, gardening, landscaping, reading, blogging, writing, singing, all these different skills that they brought to the community. They then said, what is your passion, right? Let me hear some of these strengths. Let me hear some of your passions, things that you're really excited about. Problem solving, educational justice for youth. We had the outdoors, horticulture. We had directing cultural events, youth initiatives, bike riding. We're passionate about senior initiatives, job training, youth literacy, etiquette, dressing, shopping, photography, right? And we're starting to see some overlap. We're looking at all of these skills, all of these passions, all of these gifts, and then we go back to our topics of interest from youth and we realize the community has the assets to bring the skills that the students needed in this particular case, right? We've got our assets down the street, right? Within a 3-block radius of the school, we have residents who can do all the things on this list. We have people who are interested in doing all the things that on this list. They're passionate about politics or getting youth involved in music, right? Passionate about cooking or bike riding or working out in the community. So how do we bridge that gap, right? How do we bring people together to ensure that, we have all these assets, we have all this, these challenges. Let's make sure that we can start looking through a lens of asset-based community development to actually develop our communities holistically. So we have these teachables, right? What are all the teachable things that we have? And all these residents, again, answered that question as well. And what they did instead of that kind of blocky map that I showed you before that had all the deficits or the challenges of a community, is that they created a community assets map, right? Instead of looking at the challenges and sitting in that challenge, they said, let's go ahead and flip the script and start talking about what are our assets. They had things like businesses that they pulled from, churches they pulled from, different income levels, older adults, right? Artists, youth, schools, community colleges, all these were local institutions, and these were the gifts that individuals could bring. I think sometimes we think of assets as physical spaces, or we think of them as physical, objects that we can hold and touch and bring with us places. But the reality is that they saw assets as people, right? Assets as skills and passions, things they could bring into their work every single day. So through partnership with the residents of the Woodlawn community and the youth, they were able to start building out what a community asset map actually looks like and use that to ensure that they were building their community. What does community development look like? It looks like looking at our assets, looking at our challenges, and bridging that gap between the two. So I say all this to say that when you're thinking about youth programming this summer, it's important to think about what assets exist in your current communities that you would like to bring in to these conversations, right? I think it's important to think about the lenses that your youth come in with, right? They're from different neighborhoods, I'm sure, different parts of the community. What leaders can you bring in from those different parts of the community to help support you in the work, right? But also to give students different perspectives than they might have had otherwise. So we like to start by thinking about what is the asset map of a single community, and Woodlawn, is a really great example of how they did that. And that was simply by asking the question. So what does this look like specifically within, communities that we exist in? What does this look like for youth? Okay, so this is a community member power progression that we like to use as an organization as well. We've got this asset-based community development. We're talking about assets, right? How are we actually positioning youth as assets, right? Our third goal of the session was around leveraging youth as assets in their own communities. Oftentimes within programming, I should say, and we've all been guilty of this, we kind of situate students a little bit lower on this ladder than they are capable of, right? We're not really looking at them through an asset-based lens. You have this victim, victim rung. In some cases, you need to have this kind of orientation towards people. If you are a firefighter, for example, right? If you have a victim that is being, that is in a burning house. That's an example of when you might have an orientation towards someone that is a victim mentality. But as we move up that ladder, you start to get more and more voice of the people that you're working with within it. Client mentality is kind of, in a way, when I was a teacher, a way that I would look at students, right? Students are my clients. I'm trying to teach them. I need to give them these skills. How am I best meeting the needs of my client, right? That does not include the youth voice into that conversation, right? So as we move up into this kind of blue level, this advisor advocate, it's me instead as a teacher asking my students, how do you want to learn that? Is this working for you? What kind of lessons do you all want to learn? We're talking science. Here's my list of all the things students want to learn about volcanoes. How can I fit volcanoes into the standards that I'm teaching in my classroom, right? They start to be advisors and kind of building out what those lessons could look like. Then you get into this advocate space, right? Where students are actually leading the charge on that, right? Instead of me asking the question as the teacher in the room or as the adult in the room, students now are advocating for themselves. They're saying, I want to learn about volcanoes. That is the number one thing that I want to do. Or I think a problem that I see in my community is houselessness. And I think we need to solve that problem. And I have some ideas on how to do that. So as you start to move up these rungs of ladders, you're no longer just placing students in this client mentality, you're serving them, right? Instead, you're creating co-producers, right? How are you co-producing a vision and outcomes for a particular project? How are you cultivating something together? How are you making something together? So instead of just saying, our students are advocating for houseless people, how do we come up with solutions to that? How are they coming together with adults in an authentic space to be producers of that vision together? So how do we come up with outcomes as youth and adults in a particular space? In your given summer programming, if your summer programming is around, it could be, reading and literacy, right? How do you co-produce a lesson together? Once you have students in your program, how are you leveraging the way that youth like to read? Do they like to buddy read? Do they want to teach each other? Do you want to do peer-to-peer support within that space, right? If you're doing, a skateboard club, which has been really popular in one of our middle schools recently, it's like, well, some of the students who have built up a skill before the club, they could just teach that club, right? How are they co-producing what the lessons can look like? They maybe have they definitely have more knowledge than me in skateboarding, right? So how would they do a scope and sequence around what to do first, second, third within those given sessions? Thinking about that, yeah, in all types of team settings, basketball, if that's what you're learning, if you're thinking about even just doing community engagement work, if your students want to build a community garden, co-produce that vision with them. One of our schools they surveyed students, what vegetables and fruits do you want in our community garden? And their top choice was pumpkins, which I think is really fun, but that was the top choice that they said. Probably wouldn't have been mine as an adult, but I think, the reality was like, that was what they saw as something that was really important to them was growing pumpkins and squash. So that's what that community garden is going to have, so co-producing that vision together between, both youth and adults and creating that authentic partnership, not just saying, can you show up to the space? I need you to I want you to just give your opinion on something, but actually following through on what that opinion might be. So we use this model quite frequently in Tulsa Changemakers to ensure that we are sitting as much as possible in that co-production space. Even our logo was co-produced with youth in mind. So they helped us build out what the logo looked like for the organization, let alone they're part of our strategic planning as well. So constantly thinking about how can I co-produce this with youth that I'm serving or youth that I'm working alongside, I should say, is even better framework there. This is a tool that we use as a rubric, right? It's both a tool, but we like to make sure that it's not a value judgment. So I know this is really hard to see on the screen. What I'm going to do is share this in the chat for you. And I'm going to give us about 3 minutes to read through this ladder of youth voice. You are going to see that there's a weird picture that comes up with this link perhaps, but in the chat, I just put a link. This link is going to take you to the ladder of youth voice. If I can get a thumbs up to make sure that it actually did that, that would be really cool. Little thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you are seeing the ladder of youth voice here. Great, thank you all for your thumbs up. You are going to go ahead, I want to give about 3 minutes to just kind of digest this rubric. And a question that I have for you, and I'll put this question in the chat too, is why do you think Adam Fletcher with the free child project youth rubric put an 8 on top of a 7. So why do you think that 8, the youth adult equitable partnership, is above a 7? That's a question I'm going to ask you about after about 3 minutes, but I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. I want you to read through this rubric and we will come back then. Okay, Beth, I see your question in the chat. If you click on the link, it should be larger there, or you can kind of zoom in. I tried to zoom in here on my screen as well, at least to get some of that top part. Great, thanks, Beth. I'm putting a question in the chat. That question is, why do you think an 8 is above a 7? And do you agree or no? Once you get a chance to read it, if you want to type out kind of your answer to that question in the chat, and then in about a minute, I'll give a space for us to also unmute and kind of get some chance to discuss that a little bit. Thanks, some answers coming in. Thanks, Laura. All right, so I'm going to open up a space now for you to either unmute or put into the chat, thinking about why do you think an 8 is above a 7 and whether or not you agree. I see we already have kind of Laura in the chat saying 7 doesn't include adults. Jessica's saying yes, agreeing with, I think agreeing with the 8 being above the 7. Hasiel talking about working in silos. Yeah. What other thoughts? Sounds like we agree. Maybe give me a thumbs up if you feel like you agree with the 8 being above a 7. Either with your camera on or with the little icon. We love a little reaction emoji. If you agree, give me a thumbs up. And if you disagree, how about a little, a different emoji other than the thumbs up? Love a little disagreement too. So feel free to do that. This is not a perfect tool. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of agreement overall. No explicit disagreement. Okay. Might exist. I could see someone saying, in youth organizing and activism spaces, that should be guided by youth because they are future generations, right? But I think I think there was some commentary up here about silos, right? Not including adults in that. So I think, I'm aligned with that. One thing I want to kind of, make very clear is that within a given session, your organization could be operating in any of these spaces. Right? This is not a perfect rubric in that you can't think about your summer programming as being always at an 8, right? That's just not also, 1, not necessary, but 2, not going to, in a perfect world, maybe, but that we're not in a perfect world, right? Even within our organization, where this is kind of our framework, we realize that there are some meetings where we sit in the youth consultative space. We sit in that number 5 in that green area, and we are asking students, we had this question the other day of, why we're trying to solve the problem of transportation in Tulsa, transportation specifically of youth and specifically to get to programs. So we asked the youth in our advisory committee, we said, why, do you carpool often? And if not, why? If so, why do you, right? And kind of got some feedback from them. And really that was just a moment to consult with youth. What is a reason why you might carpool with a family who lives nearby? What are some reasons you wouldn't do that? What are your fears? What are your, excitements around it? And so we really sat within that meeting at this 5, right? And that's okay. This is not again, not a value judgment, just a tool to use for you to have some kind of understanding of where you're sitting in that space. 8 is a really hard thing to accomplish successfully. We're in the middle of creating a City of Tulsa Youth Advisory Council. So we'll be working with city councilors in the mayor's office for youth to come together and have a space to talk through what they want this future of Tulsa to look like with the people in power. A fear that I have in that particular space and in that summer programming that we have is that it's going to end up being more of this kind of youth informed space, maybe even a tokenism space. That would be a space that I would not want it to fall into, where city councilors are like, yeah, we did this great thing and we listened to youth. And it's like, did you? Are you bringing any learnings with you as you leave this space? So, trying to avoid that within our particular spaces, I think is really important. But then, you can see the value of having that youth adult equality as well, right? Think about mentorship programs, partnering, adult mentor with a youth mentor, and how are they having bi-directional conversations and learning from each other? I think that's a really cool space to be in. So I have one more reflection question for you all, if you want to put kind of your answers in the chat. As you're thinking about your summer programming, as you're thinking about the programs that you all are going to be executing this summer, where do you think within your planning right now, you see students sitting most? Where do you think you see youth sitting most? Within this rubric? Do you think you're at that 8? Do you think you're going to have perfect youth adult equity within your programs? Do you think you're maybe at that 1? Maybe you're pushing a political agenda. I'm sure that's probably not happening, but maybe that's what's happening in your programs. I would like to hear from some people, maybe vulnerably in the chat, where you think your organization's sitting on this particular rubric. So maybe give me the number, maybe give me the phrase that's coming to mind, some explanation, but I'd love a quick reflection on where do you think you're sitting potentially with your summer programming on this particular rubric. No right or wrong answers, just reflections. Feel free to unmute too. Happy to open up the vocal space too. Laura, thanks for that really honest reflection. Seeing in the chat, we have a lot of work to do. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm feeling some kind of discomfort too, and thinking about the programs we're doing this summer. So I appreciate that. Appreciate that reflection. Seeing some agreement in the chat. Always work to be done. 4 and 5, yeah. It's great. I think 4 and 5 are really valuable spaces too. I'm seeing this in the chat. I'm seeing where we're looking at like a 4 and a 5. And I think, again, those are valuable spaces to be in as well. I could shift in one session alone in 1 hour. You could go from a 2 to an 8. So there's something to be said for that too. Awesome. Well, if you're continuing to think about this, you have that link, you have that tool. I encourage you to look at it and use it. Again, it is not a value judgment. This tool is not a value judgment. It's just something to think about as you are planning your programs, as you're, thinking about how do we elevate that youth voice and choice and power within each of our programs to ensure that there's engagement, right? Engagement, but also true youth power kind of interwoven into all of the things that we're doing across the country. My program, we're trying to get some, more engagement and responsibility for students. I think that's great. Thinking through what leadership positions could exist within that particular program. How can we lean on expert students who did the program last year to now be youth facilitators this year? What peer-to-peer support can we be providing for students? How can older students help younger? How can younger students support older students? I think that's also a really great framework to have. So thinking about, and then as you're planning, right, it's March now, we've got a couple months. How are you bringing students into those conversations beforehand? So hosting a focus group, right? Hosting a focus group and saying, hey, here's the plan we kind of had. What is your feedback? Giving specific examples of do you all like that we're doing this here? How would you do this activity? Do we need more hands-on stuff? Do we need less hands-on stuff? What do you all want? What do you all want and need from us? What time of day is the right time to do our program? That's a big question we've been asking ourselves too, as we're thinking about summer programming. So there's ways that you can start to do that in action and take action on that before the program even starts, right? How are you bringing youth into those, you've potentially you worked with youth before, maybe you have not, but how you bring in different stakeholders in that conversation as well. Community leaders too. Think about adults, think about community leaders who know the community better than, you might all be community leaders. I don't want to make that assumption that you're not, but how do you bring in more community leaders into that conversation too? Thanks, Erica. So with that, kind of gave a pretty broad overview and framework. We're going to have about 5 minutes to kind of start a little bit of an independent reflection. So I have a set of questions here. Oh, excuse me, don't go to that slide yet. I've got it ready to go. Here we go. I'm putting this into the chat for you all. This is a set of questions to help guide some of your personal reflections during this presentation. but also to think through, how can I start to actually implement these systems and structures into what I plan to do this summer? So you might be thinking this is a lot of information. I am, this doesn't feel completely relevant to anything that I'm doing. I'm hosting this, this program that has been, successful for 20 years, and I don't really know how this fits in. I want you to take a minute on this personal reflection. It is actually just like a view only. So you may just want to write down the answers in a notebook. If you're using that kind of structure, you may want to copy the file. That's up to you too. But there's some pretty, important personal questions to ask yourself as you move in to youth spaces around kind of what ABCD looks like, as well as what this ladder of youth voice looks like. Thinking about how you're authentically partnering with parents and guardians, thinking about how are we tapping into existing community strengths, thinking about how am I looking at my own self through an asset-based lens, right? What strengths am I bringing to the table here? Maybe I'm great at building relationships. How do I bring that into the conversation as we are kind of planning out our programming? Maybe that's not my strong suit. Maybe my strong suit is organizational structures and processes. Great. How do you partner with someone who can build really strong relationships to build out like a really great summer program for students? So I'm going to give us about 5 minutes to really take the time. I encourage you to really take this time. I know it's a virtual conference. I know we're all, in different spaces, but I would like to take 5 minutes to that independent reflection, just to get an idea of where you're at and what work still needs to be done. So I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. Let me know if you're having any issues with accessing this document. I'll keep some of these questions up on the screen so you all can see it. Excuse all of my tabs, but close some of these, great. But yeah, take a couple minutes to do that. I'll put 5 minutes on the clock. I'd always put on jazz for my 4th grade students and I hated it, so I stopped doing it. But if you have your own personal music you'd like to put on, feel free to do that within your own reflection space. I think a question that's not on here that I would also be thinking through is recruitment to your programs. I know we have been thinking about systems and structures to ensure we have an equitable recruitment process, ensuring we're reaching all schools across the city. So thinking about that too. How are you leaning on your, the assets of your schools themselves as you're recruiting for programs? Some of you might be working in schools, what assets exist within them, but then get outside that school structure too, right? What assets exist within a 3-block radius of your school? Have you knocked doors and asked people what assets they bring to their community? How do we bring people together to do that? Give us a couple more minutes for that reflection. All right. I really, at this point, want to give us a little bit of a platform to kind of brag on our communities. Like I said, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I know we have different providers from all of the state of Kentucky and Oklahoma as well. I would like to hear from some people. I would love this to be an opportunity to unmute too and kind of really give us like a kind of look into what you've been planning and what your community looks like. What are some assets in your community? So if you could unmute or go into the chat and let me know your name, your organization, and then what are some assets you're thinking of as we went this presentation that you really just want everyone to know about. This is a great opportunity to just think through, like, what do I love about my community? I could go on and on about Tulsa. I won't. I know there's a lot of work to do in Tulsa, but I also know that there's beautiful infrastructure for grassroots organizing here, and just really we're building out that infrastructure for youth voice, which makes me really excited. But I want to hear about you all. Let's hear. Let's take a minute to just kind of reflect together. What are some assets that exist in your community? Let us know what that community is and what assets come to mind for you. Really want to open up a space here for that.
This is Laura from Louisville, Kentucky. I do love my city, but today is probably not the best day for the Louisville community to reflect on that, because we had the Attorney General in our state today talking about all the civil rights violations for our police department with the killing of Breonna Taylor. Mm-hmm. So why I like to be eternally optimistic, today's probably not the best day for the folks from Louisville to participate in that. A little bit of it is joyful because these are things that we have been saying, and now the federal government has come in and validated that what our community has been lifting up and reflecting, but it's still sad. So Louisville's a great community, but there's phenomenal work being done in grassroots organizations and shining spotlights on opportunities. But I made a comment earlier that we still have work to do about engaging our youth. Our community as a whole still has work to do. So, but I continue to be optimistic. I don't want to throw a wet blanket on that, but I just wanted to offer some reflection of where our community is today.
I appreciate that, Laura. I think one, the context is incredibly important. I think two, it really brings us back to that opening piece around asset-based community development not being rose-colored glasses, right? We see that there are things that need to be fixed, and we don't ignore those. And I think that's a really strong example of one, how it's not, that the context is important, but two, it's not being ignored anymore. And we have, it sounds like there's strong community leaders and strong community organizations who are coming together to ensure that we're elevating those challenges that exist. And I think that asset is that community organizing, right? Bringing people together across, maybe even lines of difference to decide we need to fix this problem. I think that relationship building itself is an asset. Thanks, Laura. I really appreciate that. I want to hear from at least one other person. What assets exist in your community? It can be in the chat. I'm happy to accommodate that way too. Thanks, Nico. I see one of the parents of a kid that has attended my program is a fire chief. I keep in contact to always have firefighters visit the kids during summer camp and in the school year. I think that's a great example, Nico, of how you're truly building an authentic relationship with a parent. And I'm sure students, love the opportunity to ask someone about their career path. And, I know my students always loved, meeting the firefighters from across the street too. So huge community asset. And a great, great career path to take on too. So I think that's great. Thanks, Nico. In Winchester, Kentucky, this is from Erica. We are very creative driven. We have a partnership with the University of Kentucky College of Design. Very cool. And I've created an art camp for the summer to give more opportunities to create and learn. Yeah, that's perfect, right? That partnership between the university, which is a huge asset that exists in any city, right? And then, and college students too is a huge asset, right? People who are potentially passionate and driven and excited to be creative and near peer opportunities too for students. So I think that even having that physical space of students on a college campus, it's great. Awesome. I want to keep seeing some of those reflections on assets in the community in the chat. But I have another question for you, which is a little bit actionable as we start to kind of close out the session a little bit, is the second question that I have here on screen. Second question is around what is one way you will implement this framework into your summer programming? So I want you to think about as you're planning, I want you to think about maybe the actual execution of the programming itself. But what is one way that you will work to implement this framework, the either ladder of youth voice, asset-based community development, the intersection between the two, into the work that you're doing this summer? Excited to see any chat options, but I'd also love if anyone wants to unmute. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. My face kind of hurts from smiling a lot. Would love to hear from anyone in the crew. Erica is saying in the chat, I definitely plan to survey my students to find out what they want to learn more and find community resources to help teach them. It's great. The survey is a perfect place to start too. Erica, remind me who you're with. Is it YMCA, maybe? Tones Concept, yeah, great, elementary, great. And so with students, pretty often, I can imagine. So that's great. Elementary school students will definitely tell you all their opinions, which I love. All right, well, this was our kind of reflection time, thinking about these two questions: what assets exist in your community right now, and how will you use this framework moving forward? I think are really important to kind of access you know, how is this relevant to what I'm doing? You might not be thinking systems level in the way that sometimes Changemakers is thinking systems level. You might be thinking within an individual program. I want you to know that this framework works for both of those things. How are we thinking, you know, not only neighborhood, not even neighborhood level, how am I thinking about it within my particular after school program that I have control over? How am I thinking about it in terms of my organization? How are we bringing youth voice into what we do on a daily basis? If we're, you know, working with youth, how we're working alongside youth to really give them that voice and choice. So there's a lot of different ways to think about this. You know, sometimes I get in my brain and I kind of start thinking full, you know, systems level change right away. But that's, you know, that's not the first step. The first step is actually talking to students and ensuring that you are creating programs that students feel engaged in, feel excited about, feel are relevant to what they need to know. And that means, you know, bridging the gap between students and community leaders who have some context of what the community needs and is looking for as well. So thinking about your community through, you know, that asset-based community development lens, ABCD, you can find a lot of different resources for that lens online too. If you're typing in asset-based community development and that ladder of youth voice, there are tons more resources where that comes from. This was just a really brief overview of what that can look like. So with that, you know, I'm ending a little bit early. I'm sure, you know, that gives bathroom break time, restroom break time, whatever the case might be. I'd be happy to hear some more ideas in the chat. Also happy to take questions. So I will stay on for the next, you know, I think we have about 10 minutes left. I'm happy to stay on for that next 10 minutes to answer any questions you might have. Here are the email addresses of myself and my two coworkers. Feel free to send us an email and my number's not on there. So clearly missed that. I can put that in the chat too. Feel free to send a text if you want to talk through any ideas that you might have, any way that you can, you know, execute upon making these youth adult partnerships happen. Happy to talk through what our recruitment methods look like, strategies we have around supporting development of program alongside students. And then, you know, yeah, any types of ways that you want to think about surveying or doing one-on-one interviews, focus groups, in order to get some of that youth voice really intertwined into your group and ways that you can position students as leaders within those programs as well. So with that, I know it is probably lunchtime or kind of nearing the end of lunchtime for some of us. So let's go a little bit early. If you have any questions, please stay on. I'm going to be here for the next 10 minutes and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But thank you all for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to, you know, meet different people working in different youth spaces across the country. Thank you, Nico. Have a great rest of the Wednesday. Thank you all.